Kylie, what plan would you prefer Mary Ann put up?
Option A is good.
Okay.
So as Dr. Freitas said, we have two options to present to you tonight. Option A is similar in structure to the option that we brought to the board last week, and we went in and added some instructional time to this option and changed the structure of it a little bit. What I wanted to do is just go through, after telling you kind of what the structure looks like, give you some of the highlights and the challenges that we have identified. The Monday on both of these schedules looks the same. We are used to 1 day a week, providing teachers with a professional learning community time, time for our staff to meet together, our departments to meet together. And that time is precious because, you know, we're working in a situation now where I certainly never taught in a virtual environment, and I don't know many people who have. When they sign up to teach high school, we're used to teaching kids face-to-face. And so we talk a lot about the fact that this is an experience that is in some ways putting all of us back in our first year in the classroom because we are adjusting to a new normal. But the highlights for option A, as you will notice, this schedule allows a student to complete their full 7-period schedule over the course of 2 days because we have expanded the instructional time within each period to 65 minutes. So what you see when you look at this schedule is a 65-minute period followed by 30 minutes of support for students, where if I am a student and I'm in my first period math class and I'm someone who maybe takes a little bit longer to get it in math, I can stay for 30 more minutes with my teacher in the Zoom that we've already established. We don't have to walk away. We don't have to come back or make a special trip back into the classroom, the virtual classroom. And I can stay and get that extended support. If I have questions, this might also be an opportunity where some students who are really getting the concept or maybe supporting some of their peers who might be struggling. So we're using that 30 minutes of support directly embedded after the class in order to allow a more continuous support period. This, we're thinking, would allow students to process information and practice between periods with the teacher if they need that. Students might be more likely to use support, we felt, in this particular structure because, for example, if I am a social studies teacher at RB, I might teach Western civilizations to sophomores or freshmen, and I might teach AP economics to seniors. And we were thinking that if we aligned a support with the actual class, that maybe our freshmen would be a little more comfortable coming into that support. They might not be intimidated by the fact that there could be a senior who's in that particular place. If I'm a language student taking Spanish 1, I might want a dedicated time to come get support from my teachers when there's not an AP language student necessarily in there with me. So we felt like that was very important for students. The extended period, the 65-minute virtual period, would allow for students to engage in activities like longer writing assessments, sample practices of SAT practice, of AP practice, or assessments that have been created by the teacher that maybe some students might need a little bit more time on. And there's time in this for a little bit longer of a break for students. We talked about screen fatigue, and we certainly, I know there were definitely some people who perhaps poo-pooed that notion. It's definitely something that we are considering and that we think is very realistic. Having taught for a long time in a classroom, I know that by the end of the day, my 7th period class was always a struggle. For the 13 years that I taught, my 7th period class got to me and I thought, boy, they're gonna get the best of me today. And so I wonder what that is gonna feel like for a student having sat on Zoom since 8 o'clock in the morning when it hits 2:15 and they might be a little zoomed out, pun intended. So that was one of the challenges of this schedule. Another challenge that we felt, I'm sorry, that's a challenge of the other schedule. One of the challenges we felt with this particular schedule might be that every other day occurrence of a class, right? The extended period does let us have a little more depth to our classroom instruction because we've extended the time. But if, let's say, a student misses a Tuesday and they miss their 3rd period calculus because they're ill or they have a doctor's appointment or something of that nature, they're not going to see that teacher again until Thursday. So an absent student might be missing more time. That's something that we thought we might need to consider with this. And we also thought a challenge of this schedule could be that the student who really does rely on that support after each one of the classes might have a very limited amount of time to utilize those breaks, those movement breaks. Get up, stretch your legs, have something to eat, use the washroom, those types of things, because they might be locked into that support. A highlight of this schedule, as you have likely seen, you've taken a look at these, I believe, already. The synchronous virtual instruction time in this particular schedule is 20 hours and 5 minutes. We were really shooting for that 20-hour mark, and you will notice that option B does have more instructional time. But what I will say about this schedule, just in going over it, is that the instructional time that is missing from this schedule that appears in the B schedule is entirely made up in student support. So the difference between the two models that you'll see tonight in instructional time is 3 hours and 55 minutes. And this particular option, option A, has 4 hours of support built in for students when you count the periods between each of the classes, whereas the next model, because it is a traditional 7-period day, does not have support built in because there simply isn't time to get that in. So I would say the every other day nature of the schedule, as well as the student support that is built in with this particular model, is the primary sort of foundational highlight to this particular schedule.
You want to go to option B first, and then we can take questions?
So option B mirrors more of a traditional 7-period day, and based on some feedback from last week and parent feedback as well, we present this model because if we are, if the Board of Education is looking for a more traditional day, this is certainly achieving that goal. You'll see that there is no orange on this schedule, which means there is no student support time built in because all of the time is being taken up for class periods. So this is a 7-period day where students begin just like they would at RB at 8 o'clock in the morning with their first period class, and they are in every Zoom virtual class period for 40 minutes. We built 10 minutes in between these periods because we recognize that there is a very significant benefit to being in the building and having the movement that comes with leaving my math class and going to my English class and being able to stop at the washroom and get a drink of water and use the bathroom. And we really wanted to give students an opportunity to do more than just run to the washroom really quick and come back. We want them to step away from their computers. We want them to have that kind of break, so that 10 minutes in between on Tuesday through Friday is very intentional. As I mentioned, the support is not threaded within this schedule. The thinking would be that if a student is meeting with their teacher every single day, that they might not need that support threaded in. We do still have the office hours built in at the end of the day for a student who, when 2:20 rolls around, says, gosh, Miss Minot said something in 3rd period AP stats, and I really need to ask her a question about it. So a student can get back to their teachers during those office hours. Those office hours would be hours where a teacher would have an open Zoom meeting, and they would be there open on Zoom for the entirety of the period. Students would not have to schedule time necessarily. They certainly could, but our teachers would be available on an open Zoom meeting for students to come in and out as they need to do during virtual office hours. So the highlight of this schedule, as I mentioned, this schedule represents 23 hours and 55 minutes of instructional time. There is no added support time built in as there was in the first one, but there is an hour and 45 minutes built in for virtual office hours. We certainly are concerned about screen fatigue, but that is something that we will have to evaluate after the first quarter and see if that is something that we feel is impacting our students. And I know that we've talked at the board meeting and amongst our administrative team about the need to survey and to really keep up on the feedback from all of our stakeholders. There is certainly some concern with regard to, with a 40-minute period versus a 65-minute period, you don't have as much time to go in depth, but the trade-off is you're seeing your teacher every single day. This is a schedule that, again, mimics the traditional schedule, so this is something that students would be very accustomed to. This is something teachers would be very accustomed to, because it would be essentially like taking what we do in the classroom and putting it on the computer. So that is some of the highlights of that particular schedule. Mondays are the same in both schedule. Monday is sort of the jumping off point for students. There's no office hours on Monday on either schedule because teachers will be in their PLCs receiving and engaging in much needed professional development and collegial collaboration in order to continue to grow and develop as virtual teachers as we find ourselves now.
Thank you, Kylie. Let me ask you a couple brief questions. Today's Wednesday.
Yes.
7:35.
Yes.
Board needs to make a decision tonight. There's 2 agenda items on this right now, on this agenda. If the board feels that neither one of these plans are good, the other option is that the board can amend the district calendar, push back the start of the school year until there's more time for planning or training. Okay?
Yes.
So those are really the 2 only voting options the board have on this tonight. The second question I have for you tonight is, if this needs to start on Monday, and based on all the feedback we got, both from parents that wanted hybrid, parents who didn't want hybrid, board members concerned with remote learning, parents who were concerned with how the 4th quarter went, everything that we've been taken on as an administrative team, or taken in, I should say, over the last 3 months, 4 months, since we ended e-learning. Which of these 2 plans, as our curriculum expert in the district or the assistant principal curriculum instruction, which of these 2 plans can we hit the ground running with Monday morning and students will have success?
Option B.
Option which one?
Option B, the 7-period traditional day. I certainly think that there are a lot of reasons why both of these plans are good, and I think that our teachers and our students could be successful in both of these plans. The plan that provides for the least amount of a learning curve for both of our staff and our students, and allows us to hit the ground running immediately and dive into content is the 7-period traditional day.
Which plan can allow us to make up the learning gap that occurred from 4th quarter, as well as get close to achieving a traditional quarter of school in these first 9 weeks?
Option B.
I mean, I'm asking these questions because I understand, like, parents, this is not easy. I understand that people are upset on both spectrums. But at the end of the day, we got to make up some of the learning that was lost in 4th quarter being thrusted into e-learning or remote learning for 9 weeks. And we're starting a new school year off in almost the same exact spot. And so what we're trying to do today is identify a plan that will help close the gap of what we lost in 4th quarter and get us as close to finishing a real quarter in this 1st quarter. And so those are the reasons for asking the plan. I didn't have any input in the plan. I allowed Dr. Freitas, Ms. Lindquist, instructional coaches, and the teachers worked on these plans over the last 2 days. I gave some feedback to Kylie. But what I want to make sure of is we don't have time for staff to figure this out necessarily. So I think with where parents are at, if the first 2 weeks go rough and we're on option A and teachers aren't familiar with how to teach in the block schedule and they're working through sorting that out and parents aren't seeing the rigor that they want to see, like, we don't get those 2 weeks back. So now not only do we have the 9 weeks where we had some gaps from 4th quarter, but now we added an additional 2 weeks from this quarter. And so my thought is if the block training needs to occur, or this is something that we need to visit so that if we need to use this again at a later date, or if we see that after the first 4 or 5 weeks there needs to be adjustments made, maybe that's something we could start doing as we implement option B to try to, is that something that could be pulled off?
Yes. I think that that's one of the reasons why we brought 2 schedules to you. A is an expansion of the original schedule, and I'll be transparent in saying that I didn't think that we would be going remote maybe as quickly as we did, but as we have expanded the instructional time from the last meeting of that A schedule, I think you're exactly right. We need to be able to provide some professional development to teachers. I never taught on a block schedule, so I can see myself saying, gosh, 65 minutes in front of a computer that's a long time for me to make English happen and make people like it and not want to come through their screen at me. So I think that what sets our students and our staff up for the greatest amount of success would be the second schedule, the one that's on the screen now, that is new to the board this week.
And if I could add, option B, what really sold me, and in listening to you all and the parents, is the instructional time. Option B has almost 4 hours more a week. You multiply that by 4 in a month, that's 16 hours. By our 9 months of school, that's 144 additional hours of instruction. We're gonna need those hours to do well in AP. We're gonna need those hours to perform well on the SAT. We're gonna need those hours to perform well daily in our classes. So that's why I support, as Kylie said, option B, if the board chooses so.
Those are the questions I had as a superintendent. I don't know what the board members would like to ask, or the
Well, we
students.
start with, yeah.
Sure, I can jump in, and I'm sure as people talk, I'll come up with more questions. So, under A or B, what does success look like? Let me put it that way. How do we judge if this is working? Are we evaluating getting student feedback? How often can we get parent feedback? How often can we get teacher feedback? How agile can we be? We've been asked to be, I think, very agile. Everyone involved has been. You know, could we modify this in 4 weeks or in 5 weeks? Whichever way we go.
I mean, I'm happy to, I certainly, you know, that's what education is to me, right? Evaluate and adjust and evaluate and adjust. And so Dr. Freitas and I are looking at, you know, a communication plans that provides feedback throughout the quarter. We haven't nailed that down in terms of like how frequently, you know, we haven't gotten to that stage yet. But I would say from the administrator side of me, I would be happy to make adjustments if that's something that the board would support after a certain amount of time and we evaluate and we get that stakeholder feedback and we see if this is working. You know, one of the ways that, you know, you mentioned how are we going to know? You know, if we have a schedule like this and we see that kids are showing up for third, fourth, fifth period and they're not coming to first, second, sixth, and seventh, then we know that the 7-period day maybe is not working, right? If our teachers in our 7th period class are unable to, you know, get our students to kind of get with it and be still engaged and rocking and rolling because they're fatigued, we're going to know that. And I think I would happily make adjustments.
And if I could add, Kylie, to what you're saying, the same things we're doing now. Looking at our attendance metrics, engagement level, looking at the grades the students are earning, looking at the assessments the teachers are giving, all the things that we have done in our traditional school, that's how we would measure success. And of course, we'll be more than open to make adjustments as we look at what's going well and what's not.
So I think those are very sound answers. Thank you. But I think when the board meets again, I think I'll speak for a number of us. We'd like to see some quantifiable data, right? Like on attendance, on grades. One of my other questions would be about standardized testing. Does that open up time in the schedule? Do we not have as many standardized testing requirements this semester going in? Does that time get translated over? Nothing's been said on that front? Okay.
I don't know if the state's made a
They
determination.
have not made a,
knowledge.
Not to my knowledge, the
Okay.
state has not made a determination on like IAR or some of
Right.
the other mandated state tests.
So I think that to me is an interesting question mark that I'd like to, I mean, obviously the information is flowing on a somewhat irregular basis, but my sense is if those tests are not taking up as much calendar time, that again is more instructional time to help us bridge the gap from last year and move forward. I would certainly be supportive if the board has any voice in, you know, somehow waiving some portion of those tests to do so because of these unusual circumstances. So those are my general questions. I'm sure I'll get back to more. I'll turn it over to Mona.
Tom, do you have any
Oh, I'm sorry,
questions? Tom? Is he still there?
He's on.
No, not at this time, thank you.
Okay.
Feedback.
Wow, cool.
No, not at this time, thank you.
Okay. Let's jump to the sides, Mr. Question.
I don't get to go.
No, you'll go before me.
You could just jump in.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I appreciate your comments, Dr. Freitas, about the increase in instructional minutes, because a lot of the emails we have received from parents, they're very concerned, kiddos that are in AP, The AP test isn't going to be any easier at the end of this year. So I very much am concerned about the amount of instructional time, the kids that are going to be taking the SAT, ACT. Those tests aren't getting any easier, so I do worry about the learning loss that occurred at the end of last year, and we really have to make that up. I had a question. Wes, you brought up about how the building is going to be open for students to be able to come and, what did you say, a safe, quiet place with internet access to engage in remote learning. What does that look like for students with either of these plans? If we, I mean, are we capping the number of students who can come in?
We got this expectation tonight from Mr. Smithing, so we're working on it. We
Okay.
talked about it a little bit, but we have to put together that protocol.
Well, I appreciate having that for maybe some of our students that have a lot of younger siblings, parents working at home. Things might be a little bit louder at home, so I appreciate having the building open so they have a quiet place to come and learn. But I just want to make sure if the building is open that the kids here are social distancing, are being safe, that the surfaces are being wiped down, like all of that stuff. And I know you'll work through it.
Right.
And then for parents who don't watch our board meetings, how do we get the word out about that?
We'll send out formal communication once we have that plan in place. I don't anticipate that being ready to go Monday morning.
Okay.
I anticipate that hopefully by the end of the first week. We've talked a little bit today whether using the field house or the cafeteria, so that's one student per table, and we limit it to, obviously it has to be less than a group of 50, unless additional restrictions are applied, it would have to be smaller than that. But we have the ability to open our cafeteria in the event students need a quiet place to go. We would have to work through with our educational support staff on how that would be staffed to make sure we have proper coverage. We believe we have the protocol in place in regards to scanning visitors to the building, so that we still are working through the final details of that plan.
Okay. And I agree with Deanna. I would love some kind of survey the students, survey the parents. I don't know what the timeline, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, just collect some kind of data. And I'd love to see some type of attendance, engagement data, just to make sure that, you know, if we have a student that is regularly not attending a Zoom, that they're okay, that they're not home alone, you know, just to make sure they're okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Will you come back? We can just keep-
Oh, I'll jump in.
No.
Well, I know you mentioned, Kylie, that on the first plan, you got the student support, but it does seem that on option B, while you have your regular classroom, that does seem to open up some opportunities for students to talk with each other on the Zoom meetings. So there hopefully could be some lively discussions. Students learn from each other and they can engage. It's just, I wouldn't expect that students are going to be talked at on the Zoom meeting for 40 minutes.
Oh, no.
I'm hoping that there's interaction, there's a lot of things that can happen on that meeting. They can do breakout groups.
Yep.
Whereas I am a little concerned when it's a student support, it might only be one student and they lose the opportunity to work with each other. Whereas in the traditional model, maybe with some of the breakout rooms on Zoom, they can then take that class and then kind of get in small groups. So I think there's some promise in this Model B there.
My turn now?
Sure.
Okay. I just want to thank the team that worked on bringing us two options, because it's nice to see two options, right, and have a choice. And I know the community knows that you're committed to providing, right, the best education possible. I think that being a teacher, I haven't never taught high school, but right, like even though this option B doesn't have the orange, teachers do that during their regular
Yes,
day
of course.
anyways, right?
Absolutely,
Like I
yes.
give my lecture piece or
Yes.
my directives to my students, right? Then
Yes.
I give my guided practice, and then we have independent practice, right? For formative assessment and all those, and we have kids in groups, or they're doing it on their own. And so even though it's not built into the plan, I think teachers do that
It's
anyways,
natural, yes.
right?
Good
That's
teaching
the
is
way
natural.
we teach,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So I think even though there's not orange on here, there in essence could be.
Yes.
Just depends on how the teacher, and some days, some lessons, some curriculum lends itself to that better than
Absolutely.
others, right?
Yes.
So I think that's, and then the office hours at the end, and the built-in PLC and PD time is gonna be very, very important, regardless. And thank you for, listening to the directive of the board to beef it up, right, with the additional minutes. That was huge. And then I just wanna say for some of the families that are watching too, and some of the people that are here, some of the IDPH guidelines with the cumulative contact and some of those other things, that's really why we had, with school starting so soon, we had to flip to remote because we didn't really, there was no time to put those additional things in place and do it well and make sure that our kids were gonna be here and be safe, right? And that's the first thing. And I also just wanna mention that, and I'm pretty sure my assistant superintendent is pretty on the ball, and so I don't know if it was late on Monday or early on Tuesday morning, but probably about 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. on Tuesday is when I got the email from my assistant superintendent that said the state finally released the guidelines for the standards,
The
right?
priority standards,
The
yes.
priority standards.
Yep.
So some schools started last week. You guys started this week. I'm starting next week, and the state is finally telling us what they think is
Yep.
important for us to teach. And so, even though I know that building relationships with our new students is paramount, how can I even plan for any instruction if I've gotten, I mean, of course, I know our district and this district went ahead and started doing it anyways, right? Because in essence, we know better than the state, I think.
Yeah.
On a lot of these things. But right, it's such a fluid, I guess my point is just to show what a fluid situation it is, and that we as educators on all levels are just trying to do the best that we can.
Yes.
And I know that everyone here, every employee in this building, from the custodians all the way up to Kevin, right, say, I want to do what's best for kids. And sometimes we don't always agree or think that the same thing, but I know, and I used to tell myself this when my kids went to this building, like, that's not the way I would do it if I was their teacher. But I know that every day, these people that, and I used to tell my kids this too, every day they get up and look in the mirror when they're getting ready and say, I'm gonna make a difference in the lives of kids. I am, right? Because I'm not doing it for the money. I'm not doing it for the money, or the hours, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I've been up at 10, 11, 12 o'clock grading papers, right? So I know that's not really a question, but I get to have my time, so that's what I get to
Have
say.
more time, go.
No, so I'm
Yes, I
done.
do.
But I just want everyone to realize that, the state is not as supportive as they could be.
So, couple questions. The committee that came up with this, the union was on that committee, represented by who?
Well, yeah, because it was Dr. Freitas, myself, Kevin Baldus, Beth Augustine, Dave Mannon, and then teachers, and all the teachers are union members.
So how
Who's
many
on-
teachers?
who was
and
on the
who
youth?
who's on the
So, along with the administration, I pulled all 7 of our instructional coaches. So we have 7 instructional coaches to represent all of the departments in our building. And then the teacher members of the instructional subcommittee, from when we met this summer. So there were 4 additional teachers, besides the instructional coaches that joined us on this committee.
So who are those?
Oh, instructional coaches, Wendy Cassens, Christy Hughes, Lindsay Mina, Aubrey Prince, Juan Tinoco, Aaron Cunningham, Nikki Anderson, who am I missing? Aaron.
Aaron Cunningham.
Yeah,
Who are
and
the 4
then
teachers?
Doug Schultz, Dan Bonarigo, Mark Helgeson, and Jenna Osborne.
And so Dan is the union president.
Dan is the union president.
Doug Schultz is on the exec board.
Yes,
Mark Helgeson's on the exec board.
yes.
Ms. Castens, are you on the exec board? I am.
Okay.
Ms. Mino? So the union has seen these plans, so we're not gonna
Yes,
get
I'm just
changes.
saying
I
it's-
mean, this is,
yes,
We're all in
yes.
this together,
Yes,
right?
this is a
That was
collaborative
my-
process,
That was
yes.
getting my point there. We're
everybody's,
all in this
everybody's
together.
nodding their
We
head,
don't want
yes.
committee 2.0.
Yes,
Yes, good.
Onward,
So,
onward, ever on.
I got a couple questions about this block scheduling.
Okay.
This block scheduling learning. So, in a theory, would you teach 2 sessions in a block, so to speak? Or how does, explain how it works, because I don't,
So
obviously,
blocks-
I went to this traditional
yeah,
lesson in the 80s,
yeah.
and now there's new learning formats,
Right.
so.
So
I'm trying to-
schools that use the block often, some of the schools that I'm familiar with, maybe will have one day where a kid goes through all of their schedules. So like on a Monday or whatever day it might be, I go through 7 periods to touch base with all of my teachers. And then the rest of the week is sort of split into A days and B days when you're on the block. So you meet essentially with half of your schedule in one day and half another day. And the whole purpose that schools go to that is because there's an opportunity then to elongate the lesson, right? So it's not 45 or 50 minutes. A lot of block schedules maybe are 75 minutes, potentially 80 minutes, right? So that students are getting more depth when they're with them, and that's why they don't meet every day, because they meet for a longer period of time.
So it's more like, when I went to university, and we had an hour-and-a-half class, right?
Yes,
And it was an extended.
yes,
Yeah, almost like a lab built in.
right.
So
And then you
there's
only go on
schools-
Tuesdays and
So
Thursdays, right?
there's a lot of schools that do this in an in-person
Yes,
Yes.
situation.
yes.
What would it take for us to go to that type of, how much training does that take?
Do you mean for us to go like for RB, like our traditional schedule to be block, or do you mean remote?
Oh, yeah, in a traditional in-person.
Like if we were in
if there was
school-
no COVID,
And this whole
What kind
junk
of-
didn't happen with
yeah.
COVID.
what kind would we have
I
to take?
think.
A month of training in the
Oh,
summer,
no,
2
no.
weeks?
This is I mean, I can see Gina and Ramona 2 years maybe. Something like a change like that, number one, it's a philosophical shift, right, for a district to engage in. And then it really does take sustained, prolonged professional development. So when you see schools, we've talked about standards-based grading before, or a shift to block scheduling, you're talking about, I think a 1-year training window is like fingers crossed that 1 year is enough, because that seems short to me, but I think you're talking about 2 years at most of sustained, repetitive professional development to support that kind of a change.
Because what also comes along with that is the revamping of curriculum, updating, of the lessons. So yeah, it's a multiple year process if we want to go that route, but we'll be more than happy to explore that if that is the board's wishes.
Well, no, yeah,
No, we're
we're trying to explore it in 2 days.
In the future, in the
You're
future.
telling me it's gonna
You
take
scared
2
me a minute
years to
there.
get it right in person, and we're gonna do it in 2 days on.
Well, there, as I
on a
mentioned,
screen?
when
That concerns me, right?
when we went back to the drawing board with Schedule A, we added significant amounts of instructional time. So that is why, in considering, once we added some instructional time to this and went, oh, okay, this is 65 minutes, we started thinking about the fact that this is going to require some legwork. Let's look at another option that would be something that would be hit the ground running more effectively.
Okay.
Can I ask, is there a different impact on the services special education students receive from option A to B?
That's why he's here. And then after that.
I didn't mean to
one-
cut Wes off, it
Our
just popped into
students
my
have,
head.
No,
Les,
that's,
if you're
now
done,
it's like,
after Mr. Baldus, our students
Yeah, I had
have some.
something.
And I think we got an email on
Questions.
that too.
question.
Ask it again.
I'm just wondering what the impact is on students who receive special education services on Schedule A or Option A versus Option B.
I think right now, the communication I've had with my special education staff is that we've got 2 plans ready to go, either which one we pick. The A, with those long extended period of times, would allow a more intensive educational setting with those kids, with related services even to come in to embed into those class periods. Option B, it would require us to do, so I'll go back to A. A is going to be a little more challenging, the fact that if you look at the schedule, that green, can I go back to A real quick, please? That the the Wednesdays, the green block that is at 8 o'clock is a virtual time where I'd actually have to have my teachers that teach fourth period, put fourth period in that spot there. And then Friday, 8 a.m., I would have to take seventh period and have that seventh period put in that block there. The reason being because our kids won't be in the building after lunch period. So they would be exiting the building at some point around 12:45 to exit to go home. And that's conversations I've already had with those two teachers that teach that course. They're flexible to make that happen if need be. It does only allow them to be in person for that science class and that social studies class one time a week, where the other classes like English and math and possibly reading are 2 times a week in person, like a longer extended period of time. But that's just something that we'd have to be flexible with and maybe creative. Under B, it's option B, taking into account the transition kids, the core, kids in core, social thinking, pride, and some other kids that my staff has come to me and said, I think this kid would really, really benefit from being in person for reading interventions or other such things. Would require us to have like an alternating day, where Tuesday would be from 8 o'clock till that lunch period, and then on Wednesday they'd have to come in PM session. Thursday would be an AM session, Friday would be a PM session. The reason we'd have to alternate those days is so those kids will have an opportunity to be in person in all their classes given that week. Originally I talked about doing say AM and AM and then a PM, but then some of the staff, and I met with them yesterday talking about these two plans, and one of them said to me, well, do you realize that kids would have 4 days in a row where they wouldn't see a class in person? I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. So we have to do that alternating schedule. The other consideration I have to take into account for is transportation for these kids as well. With LADSI and setting up Grand Prairie transportation, that all those groups, transition, core, would have to be on that same alternating schedule because we want to transport kids in the morning and the next day in the afternoon instead of having two runs in a day. That's just not cost effective to do it that way either.
So, I thought they're in person?
Yes.
I thought we were remote. I'm confused.
These kids have been flagged because of their IEPs and because of the need to be in person. Many of those kids need one-to-one interaction in order to work on the skills in which they are working on through their IEP.
So how do we do that safely?
So it depends on which population. The largest group that we have, the core kids, is 12. We have the spacing in one location in the building. The cleaning protocols that we'll be going through after each period. Also, there are a couple of kids that we have had directive from LADSI and support with LADSI about how to work with those kids to be safe for them and for us.
Are the teachers comfortable with that?
They are ready. They are ready. They are waiting for me to call them after I leave tonight to tell them what we're going to do so they can communicate to the parents what their day looks like. We've got a document that we created that they have communicated with the parents and asking how many days a week they'd like to have their child in session. Some of those are just for a certain class period. Some are just to come in for related services. The related service people are also waiting for me to let them know, are we going A or B, and then we put those things in motion.
Thank you, I appreciate it, because I know a lot of parents have questions about that.
Yes.
Well, I'm a fan of in-person learning, so
So, yeah, speaking from students' perspective, I think that B would be better because we made our schedules based off of that model, and I feel like that's not really the schedule that we were doing when we were making our schedules back in November even. And like maybe I had an early release that I'd only have half a day of school that day. I think that there's a lot of factors, and we made our schedules based off the traditional model, so I don't think that A would fit us in that regard. Also, I think it's a harder transition from Monday to Tuesday through Friday, because on A, there is no student support or virtual office hours. I think that'll be weird going into the week like that. But with B, we're already starting off Monday like that and then going Tuesday through Friday with the same schedule. I also think that with student support, if students already finished their work and knew what they were doing that day, what are they going to do for that 30 minutes? Are they going to play video games? Are we going to watch TV? Like, I don't know what we'd be doing. Maybe we could find useful time, obviously, but I still think that putting us on schedule would be option B. And then, yeah, we can always ask for help like we have during last year in the morning or in the afternoon. Teachers always can email us, and that's always worked for me before. I never had to, like, if I had questions at home for, like, math, I would just email my teacher a picture, and then they would just help me out with that. So I don't think that that's really necessary like it is in option A.
Oh, do you mind if I speak?
Really,
First,
yeah.
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Or for the Zooms, are you guys requiring that students put their camera on? Because for all you know, they could be like napping. But back during fourth quarter, no one had their cameras on really.
Yeah.
That's a great question. It's like, will there be Zoom etiquette?
Yeah, like
And
I
will it
feel
be
like
standard?
they should have to have their cameras on this time around if we want it to be like actual
agree.
school. But anyway, I kind of disagree with Michael. I do think it's better to have the full schedule in one day, but I feel like option B just is not enough break time, because being on Zooms for that long of a period, like all day, that's a lot. And that's a big change from fourth quarter even, because most classes didn't even do Zooms. And I just think it's going to be a tough transition. But I think if there was a way to give kids a little more break time, I think that would help a little bit. But I do think that we do need to make up for lost time, and the best way to do that is having all 7 periods in one day. And that's the most normal thing to do, to be the closest to how it was before the
Lily,
fire.
you still gotta remember too, one of those 7 periods will be your PE class, so that PE teacher that day might assign you to go outside, take a run, take a walk, come back, take a picture of your Fitbit or your Apple Watch.
Yeah.
So that class is built in there. Some students that don't have 7 classes already have a 40-minute break in there because of their study hall, their academic support.
Well, like for me, I have last period PE, so I'm just sitting through the Zooms for every other period in
So
a
you
row.
got 6, possibly, right?
What?
6 possible Zooms with the
yeah.
lunch built, a 40-minute lunch in the
Yeah.
middle? Okay.
Well, it will be.
I had a question about on a Monday.
I'm not done.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
wanted
thought
to
you.
talk to Lily, and this is probably something that Mrs. Lindquist would say, but right, there's gonna be some onus on the teachers to figure out how to navigate all that, right?
Yeah.
And make sure that they're checking in with you on your social emotional needs for those, especially in the beginning, right? What can we do, what can't we do, what's engaging, so they'll it's all, I mean, I'm not in on the planning meetings, right? But I
Yeah.
know in my district, right? So what are we doing to build relationships, getting to know kids, making sure that they are comfortable? And I go back and forth with the camera on. I think, for me personally, I think it's somewhat of a discussion between the teacher and the student. I don't know that there's any absolutes, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I
Right.
think there are circumstances where the kid, it's okay if their camera's off, for sure.
Right, I mean, especially at
And
the
you'll
high
know how
school
their
level.
house situation is at home.
Well, there's,
Right.
yeah, and I'll jump in, and I'm with you. I think as someone who's on Zoom calls for all day long, you're absolutely right. It's draining, and you
Yeah.
probably don't want to be seen for every single hour, because maybe in second period, you're having your second breakfast, right?
Yeah.
Or you're having your snack. And so I think to the point of like discretion and, you know, these are high school students, you're steps away from adulthood. You know, navigating this and working out that teacher-student relationship of what makes sense for each class is kind of what I would prefer, as opposed to making it a dictate of some sort, because that gets a little bit different. I think the big difference from the spring is that you're gonna see attendance in each period, right? That was not the same in the spring, so that to me is a real distinguishing factor.
Yeah.
And we did
And guys-
talk to that point, the instructional coaches and I talked at length about the conversation about the screen being on. We err on the side of what Mona was talking about in terms of, and you seconded the discretionary piece. The camera presents an issue of equity, if I'm being honest, right? If I'm a student who doesn't necessarily feel great about where I live, or about my bedroom, or about what I look like when I see myself on the screen, that can present a lot of issues of anxiety, of depression. I know that I get a little, after a while of having so many eyes on me when I'm on a screen, right? Someone might not have a home situation where they have a quiet, alone place to be, and they might have a mom or a grandma or someone walking behind them. So we want to be really cautious about what the situations are that we're putting our students in because of that SEL piece, because they aren't in front of us for that relationship and for that kind of check-in. So the instructional coaches and I were really feeling like we wanted students to be able to make a choice that made them feel safe, you know, and made them feel the most secure. I always go back to Maslow, right? If a student feels safe and secure, the same way with adults, then they can achieve their highest potential. But if their basic needs aren't met, then they can't go to where they need to go.
And
I just want to make a comment, though. We've heard consistently, we got to fill the gap from what happened in the fourth quarter. I saw a college student finish her quarter on Zoom. If there's not active participation, instructors require the camera on, because that way nobody's sleeping, nobody took a hike. So that's going to be up to instructors. That's in our role. I don't even know we're discussing it, but what we know is that there was a gap for a quarter.
Yep.
And whatever we need to do to close the gap.
Yep.
If it means sitting at a Zoom with camera on because people don't want to be present for the class, then maybe that's what we have to do. But we are present in class when we are here in the building. Nobody's covering up or taking a second breakfast when you're in school. So
Yeah, I
this
think-
is the
Maybe
deal.
that could be something, though, when we survey, we could really ask the teachers how it's going, because, you know, as somebody who delivers professional development for the last 6 months through Zoom, it's very difficult for me when I'm providing professional development and I can't see anybody who I'm talking to, and I feel like I'm just talking to the wall. And when I ask a question and it's crickets, I don't know if they're sleeping.
Right.
I hope not.
No, I
But
have
maybe
found
it's
it-
something we could ask the teachers and say, and start off with discretionary and just say, how's it going?
Yeah, we're getting a little in the weeds.
Right, like,
And-
exactly, and it
Yeah,
might be
I've
fine.
found being on Zooms all day long, and it went from everybody's on the camera to everybody's off the camera.
And
We're
guys,
much more effective when everybody's on the
I
camera.
wanted to add that the students will be required to log in. But as we said, you know, this could be an equity issue, and, you know, we wouldn't want to make a student feel uncomfortable. So students will be logging in, and I'm actually working right now. Unfortunately, I didn't get the results that I wanted to establish some kind of formal virtual background. Picture a student logged in showing their face with a browser in the back. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? But the struggle is right now is the Chromebook device, and using Zoom and using Google Meet doesn't allow at this very moment to have a virtual background. But just so everybody knows here, we're working on it, and the minute Zoom, you know, allows us through the Chromebook device to use a virtual background or Google Meet, we will make sure that we move that forward, because I do agree. Let's see the kids, let's interact, but we're working on that, okay?
I had a quick question.
Yeah, Lily and Michael.
Are there laws pertaining to putting on the webcam? Like, are there laws that, because we're a public school, I don't know if there's any laws that say that, oh, you have to require a student to turn on a webcam.
We could check on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the great thing, I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds here. I think the great thing about Zoom is, if a student had a family emergency, or they have somebody quarantined, or the great thing about Zoom is you could either video in or you can call in. And so there's no excuse that a kid can miss that instruction with their teacher on a daily basis. So I understand we're trying to hit all targets right now, but I think the fact that we're having teachers do synchronous learning for almost 24 hours on Zoom or Google Meets, and kids are getting face-to-face interaction with classmates and teachers, is a great start. If there's a day where a kid's having a bad day, or maybe is quarantining and is sick and don't want to turn their camera on, that's the least of my worries, as long as they're logged in and getting the content. You know, so I think we just have to allow the professionals, the teachers, to manage this process and kind of work through that. And again, we could have the feedback sessions every 4 weeks, or 3.5, whatever we decide, where parents and students can say, hey, this is going well, this isn't going well. And so we have 3 board meetings from now until the end of the first quarter, where the members of the administration, as well as members of the committee or the union, could come back and speak to the committee and give their feedback, as well as the student data or parent data we gather. So I think those are things we could all work out after the first couple of weeks.
Kylie, would you be able to explain, how it would not work or how it could work if we were to alternate weeks? So option A, week 1, option B, week 2. I don't know the logistics of it, and
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not there's no easy answer, but maybe if I hate to put you on the spot here, but maybe
No,
if
it's
you,
okay.
Dr. Freitas or Dr. Skinkis, might be able to just.
My biggest concern would be anytime the thing that seems to be the most impactful in education is routine, and the repetition of doing something similarly right over and over. What would concern me doing that would be the constant switch up, that I would worry about maybe some of our kids, especially maybe some of our kids that struggle and that need really prescripted routines to be able to be successful in a certain area. I can certainly see why that might be positive, right? You're getting the best of both worlds then, essentially. My main concern would be just that, is, are we setting kids up to struggle if we're kind of flipping things on them every once in a while?
So, it's just more of a housekeeping question. I noticed on Monday lunch is considerably, it's not the same time as the other. What was the thought on that? Just because we're doing 1 through 4? What if you did 1 through 3 and then had lunch? It'd be the same time period.
Are you talking about
Option B.
on option B? The thinking behind that initially, before we expanded the class periods on the Monday, those were significantly shorter when we first built that model. So we had some virtual office hours at the end of the day there originally, before we expanded out those periods. So that certainly could be something that we played with, if that would be something that the board would want. There's not like a secret hidden.
It just struck me that
Yeah.
it was different. And we're talking about the routine, right? All right, I don't have any further questions.
Yeah. So one more comment. I don't want to get back into the weeds of our prior discussion, but I think I want to tie it back to a point you made early on, Wes, about looking for a plan to allow students access to the building in a limited capacity, that people who do need space away from their home environment. And I think part of what we had talked about earlier as well was, and teachers who may want to work with small groups in person. I think we're obviously very supportive of that, moving forward. So kind of breaking up this day in some fashion to the extent possible.
All right,
Good?
good? I think we vetted this pretty well.
Brendan was next as athletics. Does the board want to vote on the plan first, or do?
Yeah, in case you're.
Yeah, I think we just vote on the plan, but I do want to get to the athletics. I think that if we vote on the plan, we'll probably take care of option C, or number C here.
Okay. Does the board want to vote on each option, or do you want to straw poll the board to see if they prefer A or B better?
Well, I think it's just, I probably straw poll, I think, we'll start over
My
here.
preference would be for B.
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 Yeah, B.
I'm a
Tom?
B.
Tom,
I,
option,
yes,
Which option, A or B, Tom, traditional or the block?
option B.
Okay. Well, let's just do the motion and vote on option B then.
okay. The Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves the revised remote learning plan, option B, for the first semester.
Is it semester or quarter?
Yeah, I'm
First
sorry.
quarter.
I'm sorry, yes. Let me start over, please. The Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves the revised remote learning plan, option B, for the first quarter of the 2020-2021 school year as presented in the August 19th, 2020 Board Agenda Packet. Second?
We have a second?
Second.
Gina Sierra?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Tom?
Yes,
Yes.